Good morning.
Morning, ma'am.
So last week, Friday, I kind of forgot about it yesterday. I gave you homework in the sense of branding, and I asked you to think about your brands and three topics and things that you want to be known as. Do you remember that?
Yes,
Okay. And have you given it any thought? I'm going to assume that's a no.
yes,
Have you? Okay, good. All right, so keep that in mind, all right, because that's going to be really important for you to focus on for your branding. So we started speaking about airtime yesterday in the sense of what airtime is, because remember, a radio station is not like a shop that sells, for instance, chairs for money. A radio station sells airtime. That is the product. So this product is how we make money, meaning that separate or a little bit different from a normal store, we focus majority of the time on the people, right? So we work with people because we are trying to get clients to become listeners and listeners to become clients, etc. And also because we are so used to having personalized content that everything cannot be focused purely around spots and live reads. Okay. So we need to focus on other kinds of stuff as well. So some of the other types of content that we get are sponsorships, which a lot of companies might do, or they might do branded content, which is something else. And we're going to chat through that as well. Because when it comes to branded content, in essence, it means I'm co creating content along with the radio station, which involves a bit more costs and things. Okay. So it's a little bit more costly because it takes more time and effort from said radio station. So when you have a sponsorship, sponsorships are that stuff that starts with this hour is brought to you by whoever, okay? Or is sponsored by, or the Coca-Cola Top 40, or who else is sponsored? The iTunes or Apple Top 40, whatever it is. That is a sponsorship. So all of this falls within your overall promotions campaign. You can have all of these elements within a campaign, okay? So when it comes to when we start looking at sponsorships, there is a difference between the two, but it's important that you keep in mind that the radio as we know it is always expanding and evolving, and there's always inventory that we add. We are always looking at new ways to create impact with our messaging and to ensure that the value proposition that the client, or rather that the listener receives, is really of value to them. So, like I've told you, if we do one of these sort of campaigns, we will still use spots and live reads within this overall campaign, but perhaps along with a sponsorship or along with branded content. So, if we start with the differences between these two, pretty much it comes down to how much of the brand is responsible for the content creation. So how much am I relying on the radio station to help me come up with content? Okay. So in a sponsorship, the link brands to content, we are linking brands to content that already exists. So if you have a specific feature, this feature would already be there. Let's say ask a man. And now there's the Psychology Institute of South Africa or a restaurant or whatever, then you could say, Ask a Man is brought to you by XYZ, right? Or the news or sport this morning brought to you by XYZ or sponsored by blah, blah, blah. So that's a sponsorship. Branded content is created from scratch for a specific campaign with a set duration. So that's pretty much what I with what our company does on a day-to-day basis is we create branded content segments. So it's not content that already exists because it's created and curated around the client and the taking the station into consideration. Sponsorships are usually way more affordable because the content is already being produced. The content is already there. We only need to add your name to it, in essence. Where branded content, on the other hand, requires more people, creative development, production being involved in creating and producing the content, delivering it on air. There's a lot more other types of costings involved. So you are looking at a lot higher a cost. And then it also depends on whether this should be an endorsed segment or not. But when it comes to an endorsed segment, for instance, on SABC, they will only endorse a product for 1 minute. So the rest is talking about the product as a whole and other stuff within the product, but endorsement itself is only for 1 minute. So in a case of sponsorships, there are two categories that it can be broken down into. So we know that radio stations are in the business of creating content. It's what we do, it's what we sell. We sell airtime. And this content can vary from long form content to daily and weekly topics and features. So either content that's a bit longer, long form simply refers to longer, or you have specific topics or features or interviews, which, by the way, is the next thing we're going to start talking about, which will help you with your phoners. Yes, anyway. But topics and features are time-stamped. We know that a feature takes place at the same time, daily or weekly, whatever it is. It doesn't move because it's part of appointment listening. So listeners can expect certain content to be delivered to them at the same time each day or each week. Okay, works very well for advertisers because I can align my brand to the objectives that are already there, and with your content that I know has an audience, because I know certain people will perhaps tune in to listen to the top 40 on a weekly basis, or to a musician segment or whatever it might be. So in essence, what's happening is we're associating our brand with that particular content's theme or position. So if I want to advertise something to do with musicians, then I can do it on something like a top 40 or something where I know they get musicians in to do a live song or two that they have on air. So buying into these existing content offerings is what we refer to as sponsorships, okay? I'm sponsoring your content because I think my brand will align very well with this piece. So like I've mentioned, two categories: mandatory indicators and features. So what is a mandatory indicator? What do you think is a mandatory indicator? No ideas. Yes, I saw a hand there, or I saw an unmute. Mandatory indicators are news, sport, weather, traffic, that things, okay? That is your mandatory indicators, things that have to happen on this radio station and have to happen at particular times. So almost all radio stations deliver news, traffic, that's not sport, it must be sport, weather, and financial indicators. So why do you think we still do things like traffic updates? Why will a traffic update never disappear on radio? Yes.
I think things like traffic, sports, news, weather are what keeps listeners keep on listening, because that's what they need in the morning when they go to work. And in the afternoon, they also needed to know which routine they should take when they want to go get home sooner or things like that. Mm.
So news obviously really important for us. We want to know what is happening. The same with sport. But traffic, I mean, we have apps like Waze, and we have apps like Google Maps, etc. but it's still good to hear where certain areas might be affected that might affect me. Also, though, it's a great thing to sell. People love sponsoring traffic, whether it's a car dealership or an insurance party or whatever it is. They love sponsoring something like the traffic, meaning the station manager won't take it off air because it's additional income for them that can be brought in through traffic specifically. Okay. And financial indicators obviously important for us in the sense of not necessarily on a contemporary hit radio, CHR radio station, but more so on AC radio stations. For instance, if we are investors or we have certain stocks, etc. So these content pieces play a really important role in the station's programming and the content of each show. So brands can tap into any of these or all of these elements for sponsorship because it entails a brand to enclose the content as provided by the radio station for their own messaging. So we'll have like a short thing at the beginning and a something at the end again. Okay. So in essence, what it is it's like taking an existing product and pasting a different brand over the packaging. So imagine you have a bottle of water that you've bought by, I don't know, whoever, a Quell. And I am now a hotel owner, so I buy 500 or 1,000 of these bottles. Then what I do is I take my own sticker and I paste my own sticker straight over it. So it no longer says a Quell, it'll now say this hotel, okay? That the water is from them, for instance. That's the same thing as doing a sponsorship. So what I'm doing is I'm putting my brand on this bottle now to say that it's from me. So it's like, let's say this morning's traffic is brought to you by Outsurance. So you will now start associating this morning's traffic with Outsurance as the brand. So the key for radio sponsorship is to do this in such a way that it still sounds enticing and relevant to you as a listener. So that's really important for us. So how would we structure a sponsorship? Okay, there's a very specific way that we do it. So you will start by normally having a 10-second opening billboard, which we refer to it as. That simply means a 10-second, let's say, pre-recorded spot, okay? And a 10-second closing billboard or a 10-second spot, followed by a 30-second generic spot or a 30-second live read. So if you see OBB or CBB or opening billboard or closing billboard, it means that this is where I'm saying brought to you by XYZ. And at the end again, it'll say something like Outsurance, I don't know, you always get something back, blah, blah. And then it'll have like a more generic live read to give me the messaging of this client who has bought the airtime. So opening and closing billboards can be live reads. So it can either be read by a presenter before and after this indicator, or they will be pre-recorded and played before and after the presenter reads the content. Okay, billboards indicate the brand's affirmation sponsored material. So it shows that I'm working together with the station. I've partnered with them, and it tells you as a listener that the content that you are going to listen to now or that you have just listened to is delivered to them thanks to this brand. Okay. So it creates this association with brand that can improve recognition and credibility and trust for the brand. So that is how a mandatory indicator works in terms of sponsorship. So then if we, well, okay, before we carry on, so for instance, if a bank was sponsoring a financial indicator, then it would be something like an OBB, so an opening billboard would be read before delivering the financial indicators, and it might be something like, it's time to look at our financial indicators brought to you by Bank, a financial institution you can trust with your money. Okay. And then the closing billboard, for instance, might be pre-recorded in a voice that was selected by the client. This whole thing would have been pre-recorded perhaps by the client or the station, depending on. In our financial indicators today, gold is trading at blah, 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 Brent crude oil at blah, blah, blah. Then after that, those were your indicators brought to you by Bank. As a financial institution you can trust, visit ubank.co.za today and consult with one of our financial advisors on how to grow your money. Okay, that kind of a thing. The reports are offered at a standardized cost because we buy them in a package based on how they are constructed with the airtime elements. So you would have like your rate card costing plus your billboard or closing billboard rate and the rate of a 30-second generic because of all the elements that you are using. Okay, so your cost for that and that and that and sponsoring the overall thing. Then if we get to features, so we know what a feature is. A feature is a benchmark for engagement in most radio stations. So remember a benchmark, when I talk about a benchmark, it refers to that one thing per every 15 minutes, one thing per hour, one thing per show, one thing yes, per show, one thing every 3 months, and one thing per year. Okay, that are great and stand out. So listeners know what sort of content to expect at a particular time, and they anticipate this content. We know what we are listening to. Features are normally accompanied by a jingle from the radio station itself or key introductory piece that signals the start of this content. But from an advertiser's perspective, features created by the show or the radio station offers much more interaction between the audience and the brand. Okay, that's why we will do this. There's also room here for phone calls or for social media interaction, where I can also link my brand to this whole thing. And because of this interaction, this engagement that I can have with listeners, this is invaluable to a client because content is being created for the audience. So as much as we have the section that we know, like we are going to talk about XYZ, we ask for engagement. So we ask them to send through their pics or their comments or whatever it might be. And in social media, we would have tagged the brands, we would have used the hashtags of the brands, we might ask them to use the hashtag of the brands, etc. So this way we are creating that owned media where our listeners are helping us to create content. Okay. So features have become key commodities for brands as they are viewed as a direct line of communication with my listeners. I know that if I sponsor a certain feature, I am going to get listeners who will actively engage with us with the radio station, way more than I will get if it's simply a spot that I'm playing out, okay? And in the listener's mind, I will have this positive association with that feature that already exists, which means if I align my brand to this feature, there's also a positive association. And the advertising itself becomes less blatant and in your face, meaning you'll be more open to it as a listener because it's not just like a cold call, straight up advertisement. Okay. Any questions so far? Right. So when it comes to a sponsorship of a feature, we need to be very creative in how we do it. Okay. There's a lot of thought that goes into it. We don't only do it on our own. We do ask the radio station's input with what they will be comfortable with or not comfortable with. And normally they plan to commit a longer term investment. So anything from 6 weeks upwards is normally what we're looking at. Because if you sponsor one day, let's say one show, you won't really get a lot of impact because they would have only heard you on that once. When you're considering, though, doing this over a couple of weeks, listeners get used to hearing your name in this sponsorship on the in this specific feature. Anything from 6 weeks to a year is what we would normally do. Why? Because the station um, is protecting itself from being perceived by listeners as being fickle or disloyal to sponsors. Okay? By just changing this thing on a weekly basis. So we don't want them to do that. We don't want them to jump ship every time to someone else. So radio stations ask that you commit between 6 weeks and a full year when you want to sponsor a feature. It also assists the brand in embedding themselves in audiences' minds and building on that association over time, which is exactly what you want. Okay. So sponsorships can be multi-dimensional. Aside from doing this on air, we also make use of other things, other assets. So, for example, websites or podcasts where we can put it on, or off-air events, or an activation, or social media purely, or using the presenters as influencers on this campaign. So this integration of different media elements can be used to enhance the overall impact of the campaign for advertisers and listeners. And it looks well in the numbers, okay? It increases overall reach that we can do. So this is sponsorships, right? So if we go back to sponsorship, so sponsorship is a brand linking with the content that already exists, more affordable because the content is already produced, and it can be in the sense or in the form rather of a mandatory indicator or a feature. Mandatory indicators: music, traffic, sport, weather, financial indicators, or a feature, which is any kind of feature. Okay, the feature won't start necessarily like this. Okay, it'll normally start with an opening billboard, with the feature happening on whether it's 5 minutes or an hour, and in between we might have jingles running as well, and then at the end you will have this 30-second generic spot or live read again. Okay, so a little bit similar to the structure of sponsoring mandatory indicators. Features more long-term commitments, anything from 6 months to a year. Then we branded content. Okay, so we've mentioned now sponsoring content, which means there's not so much that changes from a radio perspective. I'm not asking them to engage too much with the actual on-air content because the content already exists. I'm simply putting my name to it, like I would put my label on a water bottle that already exists to make it seem like it came from me. So when it comes to branded content, however, this in essence means co-creating content so that as a brand, we are more involved in shaping the narrative along with the radio station show. So this content is bespoke, means it's new. It hasn't been done before like that, okay? It's usually created by a radio station in partnering with a client and their creative and media agencies in order to deliver their marketing messages more effectively, to sustain listenership, but also to sustain reach, okay, or to have an impactful and high-reaching segment. So branded content allows brands to create stories that are compelling and intertwined with their message at the same time. Brands will often look to house this content on other platforms like the radio stations platforms and their own platforms due to the wide span of a radio station's reach and specific audiences and specific target markets that they are trying to reach. Okay, so quite important for us. So we want to deliver marketing messages more effectively to sustain listenership. And let's start looking at how is this being done. So branded content is an evolving sphere of media, and there are many trends ensuring best practice. Therefore, it's important that we have to consider the following points when generating a branded content campaign. Firstly, it starts with a clear brief. Okay, a brief should detail a singular objective needs to be fulfilled by the content. The content engaging to achieve a good marketing strategy. So, from a media house perspective, we would write the brief. We would send the brief through and say, this is exactly how this thing should be done from A to Z, okay, to make 100% sure they know and understand what it is that they need to do. Then think about how to deliver the narrative. When you've identified what you want the audience to know, this will help to shape how you make them aware of it. It could be through a series of short podcasts, for instance, or visual web series that depict the brand in a certain manner, or perhaps you're writing a story arc that will span over, let's say, a month's period leading up to something. Then keep the content short, interesting, and informative. That's important because our listeners span their listenership or how they listen to us. It's still just as short as it's always been, okay, their attention spans. So we need to work towards showcasing the brand in such a context, again, that it creates the desired association. Remember, content is king, context is queen. So for example, if the brand is a financial institution, again, focusing on helping people save money, instead of just saying what they do, offer tips, offer hints for listeners to save money sponsored by the brand. We've previously created WhatsApp chat groups where people can pose questions, like a question and answer segment for a specific financial institution, to also just assist with that brand loyalty and positive brand association. You can have stories of people and how they've assisted, like we're going to get to that when we talk about creating the content. But in essence, I'm being an influencer because I'm saying how great these people were for me. Okay, so I'm giving you a review. Or there's so many other things you can do, but this kind of influencers or this kind of stories gives the brand a personal face and a voice rather than just giving you a message and either overwhelming the people, or you might simply not believe what I'm telling you. Okay, because we always want to hear it from someone else. We believe things easier if it comes word of mouth kind of content that we want at the end of the day. Then we develop a storyboard and a campaign timeline, 100%. So we develop content to fill the entire period that the brand has paid for. So if it's a 4-week campaign, we need to look at how long each piece of content needs to be in order to convey a different message each week. We need to think about how this content will be released on which platforms, the audience's potential openness to it at that time. We need to match the time of the day, the audience's expected behaviors, the message, in such a way so that listeners will be in the right space to receive and act on the message. So there's a lot that goes into it, okay, a lot of thinking. Then from a agency point of view, we need to set targets, okay? Client will come to you saying that this is what they want. They need the product to sell so many of whatever items in store. They need to see that so many people were engaged, targets that needed to be reached. So we monitor our targets in terms of the engagement and brand recall, aka can you recall that you've listened to, that you've heard this thing? So it needs to run, like I've mentioned before, 21 times a week for you to be able to recall something. Then from there, it requires agility, which means that we have to be open to adapt and change the content as it's being made to ensure success. So we might need to go back to the drawing board on a weekly basis to change certain elements to make sure that it's still aligned. And targets need to be reported at the end of a campaign in what we call a post campaign analysis, a PCA. I do that every single campaign that we run. We always do a PCA. Success is not just completing this campaign. Completing the campaign is just one thing, okay? You need to see whether you've met the targets set out with the client prior to this campaign starting. Have you done what was required of you? Have you helped meet their objectives? And then lastly, make the content shareable. So it needs to be compelling enough that listeners want to talk about it after they've heard it. So the more audio, the more digital pieces that are shared, the more people will see it, the more people will hear it. And this will increase chances for the brand to influence behavior and drive conversions, which is important for us because I want to convert you. Remember the 3 C's from yesterday. Into being now into buying my brand, okay? So into investing in my brand. So that is seen as a conversion to the targets that we've set. So if we look at example 9A on page 338 of Next Level Radio, there's a costing for a sponsorship and creating a brand content. And it shows us that a sponsorship costing will include the following: the parties involved, so the client, the media practitioner managing the sponsorship for the client, the sales representative managing the sponsorship for the radio station, and the show and presenters executing the campaign on air. So in the case of a real life example at the moment, my client is both Wheat Peaks and White Star. The media practitioner will be Media Beat. The sales representative is actually not a sales representative per se, but we do have a sales representative. But then we also have the content manager who liaises between the sales and programming. So that person is involved also. And lastly, that person liaises with the show and the presenters. And sometimes before execution, we as the media practitioner will also get involved just in making sure that the presenters are briefed 100% correctly and how they should be doing this thing, okay? Then there will be a campaign timeline and on-air dates, and to a certain extent exact times if there's competition mechanic involved. And the relative radio station where the sponsorships is being booked will also be there. So you can see here on page 339, there's a table on how costing could be calculated for multiple 30-second mentions during different time channels on different days. This then adds up to a cost per the station's rate card, discount that the station is giving the client, and the required payment after the sponsorship there at the end. So instead of using this thing that's in the book, I'm going to show you the actual SABC rate card with rates that we are using at the moment. So in this case, the stations that we are using would be Lesedi FM, Radio 2000, Umhlobo Wenene, Ukodi, yeah, those 4. So you can see at the top, there's the amount of spots that will run across, the number of weeks it's running. Added value means added value that they are giving me over and above the actual value of the segment. Discounts if they are giving us discounts, and then the campaign cost is what we are paying them, all right? So this is a campaign that'll be running over 5 weeks, but like you can see, there's quite a lot of spots across the stations. We are doing station social media, and And then we are doing simulcasts on Radio 2000 and second live reads. The reason that there aren't power spots in here is because they are really expensive. So we are working on a tight budget with what we can or can't do. So this is what it would look like when this is the sheet that I get from the SABC. And I can edit this thing and send it back to them. And the salesperson will say, okay, cool, they're happy with this before they send it to clients, which in this case would be the radio station itself. So for instance, here, it's not normal to receive so much added value. It's just for this campaign that we're getting it. Normally you would receive like 40% added value, okay, for a campaign. But this will give you an idea of like the cost as well. So for a live read, for instance, in breakfast on the CDFM, a live read of 30 seconds will cost you 20,200 versus, and this is with loading fee, 50% loading fee on top of that. Okay. So it's a bit cheaper if you wanted a spot. Social media isn't expensive, it's 8,000 there. Which tally up here at the bottom. They tell you what the value is, what the campaign cost is, etc. Then let me show you Umhlobo, who has a little bit different. So again, here, this is the 20 a live read rate for a 30-second live read, but then you have a 10-second live read, and you'll see that the 10-second live read isn't a third of the rate. Okay, that's not how it's tallied. The 10-second here costs 15,500. 30-second, which is 20,700. Okay, so it's literally like a 5,200 Rand difference for the 10-second to 30-second one. So simulcasting, on the other hand, is a completely different thing. They view a simulcast the same as a 5-minute feature. So costing of a simulcast and a 5-minute feature and an interview would be exactly the same. In this case, on Mhlobo Wenene, it's 138,000 Rand for on the breakfast to do a simulcast. So if you want 2 of these, it will cost you double that. Okay, so 276 to run 2 5-minute features on one radio station. But these are costs so high also because in this case, this is branded content. We are creating the content from scratch. It's not a sponsorship, it's branded content, more expensive. The same as you would, even for a feature, unless it's a sponsorship, which this isn't, you will come up with that feature, or you will give them the content for an interview. So anything that's branded content is more expensive because more effort goes into it. So like I've told you then, yeah, 138K here. So then the overall breakdown with all the spots is on here. So here you can see the full summary, which looks like this. So total of number of spots, 72 over, they're calling it 4 weeks, it's 5 weeks. What is this? The added value that they're giving us is really high. This is very high, okay? It's not normally this high. Is 401,000. The total value of the campaign, 808,000. What we are paying is 640,000. Okay. So this is without endorsement costs because endorsement fees aren't paid to the station, it's to the itself. So for them to endorse it once for 1 minute is an additional 45,000 Rand. Then for them to endorse it on social media is an additional 15,000 per presenter. So that's an additional 30,000 Rand for 2 stations for 2 presenters for 1 post. So that already brings you at pretty much that value, that 800,000 Rand. Okay. And this is simply for a 5-week overall campaign. So the one in your book is simpler because it shows you all of this pretty much from this kind of perspective. Okay, so it shows you the days, the rate card rates, the discount, the spot cost, the total cost. Whether it's from a Monday to Friday or over the weekends, whatever it is. Okay, so same thing, just broken down a little bit different. So more like this sort of. Okay. So then if you turn the page to page 340 in your textbook there, you can see it shows you how to start creating content using a creative briefing form for whoever the client is, the media agency, the budget, how many weeks, from when the client needs a response by when, who are they targeting, so the target market, client info, what is their selling point, how do they behave in the brand marketing, and then the campaign objectives will tell you exactly what each campaign's objectives are, what are the key challenges, what does success look like, how will the campaign be measured. So this is for that layout I just showed you. So it's all about better days start with a better breakfast, make breakfast big again with Wheat Pix and White Star. And then they give us the campaign objectives. It's impact driven. It's all about making breakfast great again. It's about ingraining White Star and Wheat Pix in the consumer's mind as the biggest breakfast. There's a lot of different channels involved in this campaign. It's about engagement to generate earned media and education. They want people to talk about it, but also to go and buy the product. This has moved out, so it's running from 28th of August to 26th September, focusing on South Africa's biggest breakfast on 26th September. Primary target market, socioeconomic, 2 to 7. Okay, so it's low income to mid income in essence. And this is just for radio or TV. So what we call above the line, including influencer fees, is 1.1 million. Then they have digital that they're using, which this is different. Digital, they're also using 1.1 million on, which is a separate agency. Then here you can see just who is being used. So it's the morning live show on SABC2, the morning show on ETV, and it would have been Expresso. So here they show you on TAMS. So you know RAMs that are on your brc.org.za. They can also tell us how many viewers there are on a specific show. So on average, 352,000 viewers on TAMS, which is the TV audio measurement survey. Then stations here, we're using Lesedi, Radio 2000, and Ukhozi and Mhlobo Wenene. And across this specific time channel, it shows you the amount of listeners for this SEMs between 1 to 2 mil in the mornings. And then there's a summary saying that how it's going to launch with a simulcast and on digital also. We have what we call a CTA. I will show you what that is now. Okay, and then they just give you a little bit of a breakdown. Okay, so like I was saying, so here, this is kind of, this just shows you the behaviors, okay, of how you want to run it. So it shows you the situation. So as a part of PepsiCo's ambition to win at breakfast, South Africa's biggest breakfast is now supported by the #1 cereal, Wheat Bix, and South Africa's premium instant maize porridge, White Star. Target breakfast eaters. Insights: breakfast is the most important meal of the day, yet it gets the least amount of love and attention. We take it for granted, eat anything or worse, we even skip it. Blah, blah, blah. Results: what they want. Greater awareness for the South African biggest breakfast platform, 30% uptake in sales. So they want Wheat Pix and White Star to be bought by 30% more people. And then here, additional insights and understanding. South Africa, only 1 out of 5 kids, or 1 out of 5 kids in South Africa don't eat breakfast, okay, because of a lot of reasons. They can't afford it, or they skip it because they're late, etc. So this is also a focus. And then here you can see the key nuances in the execution of the messaging. And then this thing is what I referred to here, the CTA. This thing is what we call a CTA, which is a connections map. So this shows you everything that is happening for this campaign from beginning to end. Above the line means radio, TV, social media, and if they were magazine kind of posts, etc. From a PR perspective or in store, digital, and below the line. So lots of different things happening. So it's awareness build, it's build up, and activations. So your awareness build is on TV. It's also using digital, the digital platforms, all these different digital platforms. And then there were going to be activities, experiential activities, hit squad below the line. Then there's going to be in-store competition where you can win your share of 500,000 Rand, which the stations will also help with running, and digital is running, and digital is running into below the line here with TikTok and competition posts, etc. Then you can see how the stations and the influencers here go to print PR in the Sowetan. So we're having a section done in there. Then it's going to be on the morning live and the simulcast. The Sowetan will also mention this. Then we have digital here going into Wi-Fi and vicinity media in specific areas, into digital, which is reminder posts again, and other types of posts, into the morning show segment that'll be live. And then from here, there are school competitions, university samplings, Lady D collaboration, then teasers to internal staff and internal activations in Joburg and in Cape Town. And they will be using 6 foodies, influencers, to drive their own breakfast videos on a TikTok via a TikTok challenge. So this is how the overall thing works. So a connections map is something that shows you how absolutely every single thing connects, okay? Whether it's TV, radio, whether it's that you're working from a digital perspective, whether you are a public relations person, or whether you are the person organizing activation. Okay, I don't want to confuse you. You don't need to know all of this now. It's just to show you once again what I always tell you, that when it comes to radio, yes, radio is its own element, but like you can see here, it also drives in with everything else into the overall messaging, okay? So then here you can just see where everything is radio is running on all the different weeks, the channels. And then it's just the breakdown, like, so this is kind of the thing that we would give, this is TV breakdowns. So the on-air, from an on-air perspective, how we would brief everyone. So Machine is an agency, On Point is an agency. So we brief everyone from the radio stations to these agencies to say this is what's going to be happening, and the live reads, and we're doing this biggest breakfast thing between these 2 stations involved, etc. Okay, so this is the branded content part of this campaign. So without confusing you too much. Oh my word, has that not been sharing? Have I been talking the whole time without you seeing anything?
I think so, because right now I just see your initials.
So this is the connections map. Can you see it now? So this was all that talking that I was doing now. I'm not going to redo it. This is the connection map that shows you how everything interacts with each other, with all the different, from all different signs. So everything always needs to have a golden thread running throughout to link it to each other. We don't just do something for the sake of doing it. It needs to link in with all the other elements, no matter where you are working. Okay, we all do meetings together to make sure that we are all on the same page with what it is that we are doing. If you understand that Excel sheet that I've shown you, that's all you need to have it and break down the elements, and each element has a different cost reason. Okay, so you need to understand now what spot is, what a live read is, the reason what we will use them, how they are costed different, what branded content is, and what a sponsorship is. So branded content created from scratch for a specific campaign with a set duration. Sponsorship links brands to content that already exists. Sponsorships in the form of either mandatory indicators or features. Mandatory indicators, news, traffic, sport, weather, financial indicators. Features can be anything, any type of feature, okay? And branded content is way more costly because it's a lot more work, whereas sponsoring a feature or a mandatory indicator simply means we are adding your name to that feature. Okay. Any questions? Okay. All right. So then we're going to continue, luckily, in person next week. And then we're going to look at phoners for that section on your assignment also. So thank you for joining. Have a good weekend, and I shall see you next week.